Please welcome Todd ZYWICKI.
Thought control. No dark sarcasm.
Well, I think I win the award for the best walk-on music so far. I can't wait to tell my daughter that I walked on the Pink Floyd. It's great to be here with you. It's thrilling to be in Colorado. It's especially thrilling to appear as the visiting scholar in conservative thought and policy on behalf of the Benson Center. Daniel Jacobson, if you want to put your hand up, the executive director of the Benson Center is here. Daniel Jacobson, he's running a great program that keeps getting better and better and expanding. I know a lot of people here are CU alumni in particular, but also a lot of you support students, and you've supported the student interns for this. They're just rolling out a brand new program this year, fellows in the Benson Center, among other things. I've got a visiting lecture series, and I'm also teaching a couple classes. So it's a very important center. If it's something you're interested in, Daniel will be here. I urge you to track him down and find out what they're doing. I'm going to paint with a fairly broad brush during my remarks because I'm only going to talk about for 20 minutes or so. And in that time, I'm going to diagnose and solve all the problems of higher education. So, I'll talk a little fast during all this. But I'm also going to oversimplify and paint with somewhat of a broad brush to kind of point out the general trajectories. And I do want to say that because I want to specifically make two exceptions to that, which is first, my home institution, Antonin Scalia Law School at George Mason. I'm there. I've dedicated my career to that because they don't fit a lot of the trends that I'm going to talk about here. And I also want to talk about the reception up at CU, how gracious that has been, in particular, the support that the chancellor of the university has shown for the Benson Center and his enthusiasm for it when I met with him. So I'm going to, I'm not going to, but I'm going to talk about everybody else. How's that sound? So I want to start off with a premise that underlies this whole thing. I don't know what conservative strategies, what the conservative strategy is for fixing higher education, but whatever it is, it's not working. Is there anybody here who thinks that whatever we're doing on higher education is working? Right. It's just getting worse, right? It just sometimes gets worse slowly, and sometimes it gets worse quickly, but it always gets worse, and it never goes backwards. And the history of the world is that, frankly, whenever the left captures an institution, it never goes back. And we're pretty close to a tipping point in higher education for a variety of reasons, but I think we could start off with the premise of whatever we're doing isn't working. And so what I'm going to throw out during my talk today are some ideas that might actually work. Now, I'm going to say at the beginning, I'm not Panglossian, right? I am a conservative, which means I know that things have unintended consequences. Things don't always work out according to plans. And so as I'm talking, I'm going to be very aware that we should be cautious, we need to assess, and that there are dangers to everything I say. But framing that is, as one person said recently, what do we got to lose, sort of thing, which is if we do nothing, the trajectory is clear. If we do something, the trajectory may be less clear. And perhaps there's a possibility of saving this or turning this ship around. And right now, our strategy seems to be, let's explain to the left why they should be nicer to us. Let's explain to the left why they should tolerate more conservatives and that sort of thing on campus. Well, it turns out that's not the way that the left thinks. It's certainly not leftist academia. The left believes in power. They believe in power. Now, how would I know that? Because they say it. It's not like they're hiding the ball when they say that they believe in power. It's not like they're hiding the ball when they say we don't believe in freedom of speech for ideas that we don't like, right? They don't even really give lip service anymore to it. And so I think, the strategy of always assuming the best with the people we're dealing with is not really that viable of a strategy, both dealing with faculty, but particularly dealing with the administrative bureaucracy that runs universities today, these sort of phalanx of sort of bureaucrats with no academic value. So I'll give you an example, which is I'm the only person I know who's gotten speech codes repealed at 2 universities. I think I want to put that on my tombstone, right? Back about 15 years ago, I ran for trustee of Dartmouth and got the speech code repealed there. Came home to George Mason to get the speech code repealed there. It took me 5 years, 2 presidents, 2 provosts, all of them said they agreed with me. It took me 5 years to finally get the speech code repealed. Why? Because the speech code at George Mason is not made and enforced by the left-wing faculty. It's made by some bureaucrat in the Office of Student Life, right? Some assistant deputy dean of this, that, or the other, right? Who just kind of promulgates these rules, and nobody can figure out who did it, who was in charge of it, or anything like that, right? So a lot of what we see going on is being driven by all these administrators. But the fundamental point is that it's about power, right? For them, it's about power, and they're just playing a different game from us, right? We're sort of still thinking about the liberal university. Hopefully we can get back to the liberal university, which is what we could think of as the shared search for truth game, right? We're all engaged in a conversation to try to determine the best, right? To determine truth. Well, let me give you a little secret. They don't believe in truth, right? Again, because they say they don't believe in truth, right? The modern the postmodern mindset is truth doesn't exist. So what does exist? Basically power, right? And so when they say speech is violence, what does that mean? We laugh at it. It seems comical. But in their view, what is it? Speech is basically a way of perpetuating an unjust system that is used to oppress people. So they don't believe the purpose of the university is truth. They believe the purpose of the university is liberation. It's equity. Right? And so it's designed to basically fundamentally change society, right? That's their worldview, right? That's the worldview that is operationalized on university campuses now, is to bring this about, right? And so that's why you don't see the left actually being committed to free speech. Sometimes they'll give lip service to it, but they actually mean it when they say we shouldn't allow hate speech, right? They mean it when they say it's okay to shout down speakers and use violence to keep speakers from speaking on campus, because they see people who are saying things that support the status quo, support the current system of capitalism and the like, as basically being a way of basically rationalizing oppression in society. So what does this mean? I think that what this means is more of a pragmatic matter, moving on to certain strategies that might actually work, that might actually meet them where they are, right, in a way that can create, stop the slide, and hopefully create a space for the recovery of truly liberal education, free speech, and the like. And again, as I said, this could have unintended consequences. So I'll give you an example. One of the reasons we have this massive bureaucracy now has to do with the effects, unintended consequences of earlier reform efforts. So for example, God and Man at Yale by William F. Buckley. What Buckley said is what we need to do is put some hard-headed business people in charge of on the boards of trustees of these universities, right? So I served on the Dartmouth Board of Trustees. We had a lot of hard-headed business people on that board. What happened? Basically, the academics just ran rings around them, right? They were never going to be able to have the capability to figure out what these people were doing, right? And basically, it was made very clear to them, your job is to shut up and write checks, right? And what they did was essentially empower the president of the university, thinking of the president as basically being like the CEO of a company, which is what a lot of they were. But a CEO with no profit and loss statements, I'm sorry, is not the same CEO who has to meet a balance sheet, right? There's no accountability, and so we have these presidents who are basically being empowered without any accountability of what they were doing, who basically then act as sort of political actors responding to their various constituencies, in particular the faculty and the loudest, squeakiest wheels on campus among student protesters and the faculty who support them. All right? And so I think that's an example of a way in which what seemed like a good idea has turned out to have unintended consequences. That's not to say we shouldn't experiment, but that is to say we should be hard-headed and we should be realistic about what our options are here. So what are some of the ideas that I've thought of that might be useful ways of approaching some of these questions? The first one, I think, is just use government power where we have it. there's a law called the Solomon Amendment. The Solomon Amendment requires every university that receives federal funds to allow the military to recruit on campus. Now, do you think most universities in America are thrilled when the Army shows up to recruit every year? I guarantee they do not. They are not thrilled by that. But I guarantee they also allow them on campus. Why? Because they know that the federal funding is tied to that. And they know that we're serious about enforcing it. So you both have to have it and you have to be serious about enforcing it. So why not have a Solomon Amendment for free speech? Why not basically say you only get federal funds if you have proper supports in place for protecting freedom of speech and freedom of expression on campus? Related to that, how about the idea of something like a free speech ombudsman, where you have like DEI offices and stuff like that on campus? Why not have a free speech office where students can register, where an independent person whose job is to basically supervise the university to make sure that they're protecting constitutional rights, free speech, freedom of expression, and the like. Sure, it could be risky. Sure, it could be that the left might capture this, so we'd have to get the incentives right and that sort of thing. But a free speech ombudsman seems like something we could think about. I think one of the things we should be thinking about is developing a farm team of administrators. As I said, a lot of what makes universities so bad these days are these bureaucrats. And the administrators do have a lot of power, but they're basically being populated by woke activists up and down. A lot of the senior administrators of universities are basically a lot of them are kind of failed academics who kind of go into university administration and bring a lot of those ideas with them. But why not try to be more conscious about developing a farm team of administrators, of people who can run universities and run them in a more freedom-friendly way. We should also think about using the tools, I think, that we have at our disposal, litigation, things like that. I think a good example is what happened to Oberlin College, if you followed that whole thing, where they tried to wipe out that business on campus and ended up, that local bakery, and ended up basically defaming them. And as a result, got slapped with a great big judgment. I think the only thing that wakes up campuses with respect to these Title IX Kangaroo Courts and that sort of thing is when they're sued, right? And they'll fight those suits, right? But those sort of Kangaroo Court disciplinary proceedings they use in a lot of situations. What finally wakes them up usually is if they get sued in a EEO Title IX complaint or something like that, right? I think another thing to realize is that if we're going to talk about doing things, they have to actually be real. Right? So a good example is, why do we still have speech codes on campuses? Well, I think, for 20 years, 30 years, conservatives or de facto speech codes kind of wagged our finger and said, someday this could be used against you guys, right? They know that's not true. We know that's not true, right? Conservatives are never going to use speech codes against leftists, right? And so they treat it as an idle threat, which is what I would do if I were them, right? Tell me about the last time you ever heard the Israeli students using a speech code against the Palestinian students, right? Or protesting the Palestinian students on campus, right? For example, right? These all go one way. It's because even though these are neutral rules on the books, in reality, only one side ends up using them, and only one side ends up making a lot of noise about it. And so I think in that sense, this goes to sort of use the tools that you have in terms of if you're being harassed and you're a conservative student and the university has a policy on that, then use the policy and try to get the university to take a principled stand in favor of free speech, right? I would say to close with just a couple final thoughts, I think, two final thoughts, which is the first is we have the moral high ground on this. We have the moral high ground, right? we are the protectors of the great tradition of Western civilization in the liberal arts university, right? We believe in freedom of speech, freedom of inquiry, and the like. And I feel like sometimes we don't act like it. I feel like sometimes we lack the courage of our convictions. We compromise when maybe we shouldn't. And I think one of the things is on this is we don't make them defend their indefensible, right? Where they push ideas beyond any reasonable basis. And again, it's kind of granting them, I think, a sense of goodwill that isn't always merited. Because it is always sort of 3 steps forward, maybe 1 step back, 3 steps forward, 0 steps back, right? They basically are constantly pushing. And what they've done on free speech and what's going on in the university is going on in the rest of society, which is they create fences around things and they step by step move in the fences, right? And so they'll say, as I always say, it begins with the Nazis, but it never ends with the Nazis. Well, surely you don't want to allow the Nazis to speak on campus. And as soon as they get that, then it's, well, surely you don't see any merit to allowing, Ann Coulter to speak on campus. Well, surely you don't think George Will should be allowed to speak on campus, right? It's sort of a step-by-step accretion that they do. And so I think one of the points that we should take in mind is we have to recognize the principle and recognize that they're going to go to the extreme. They're going to go to wherever the principle leads. And so maybe that means, yes, I'm in favor of, in the name of principle, allowing extreme people to speak on campus. And if you don't like it, don't go to the lecture, right? It's as simple as that. Don't go, right? Because it really is the case that as soon as they establish the idea, they're going to push it to the final most extreme place that they can go. The final thing I'll say is it's time for I think that real leadership can come from state universities. I think what DeSantis is doing in Florida is somewhat of a mixed bag. I don't agree with everything, but I think the new college experiment is a great experiment. Let's experiment. Let's see what happens, right? Let's assess it. Let's evaluate. Let's see what happens. Glenn Youngkin, governor of Virginia, is doing a marvelous job. He's appointed real trustees to the various boards of governors, including my university. The first meeting that his new trustees had with George Mason, they not only froze tuition, they rolled back a pre-announced tuition increase, right? They've come in with an agenda. He is investing real capital in reforming the state higher university system. And so I think this idea of state universities being a place where you can bring some balance back, bring back some sanity to this whole process, I think is a very useful experiment that we could be doing in this particular area. And so with that, I'll invite my friend Matthew Spalding to come up and we'll play the error round and he'll tell me where I'm wrong. So thank you. Right, I got to take this seat now. I'm switching seats on stage.
It's all right. It's all right. Welcome to Colorado.
Thanks, Matthew.
As you all heard, I'm on the board of trustees here, so I want to thank you all for supporting the Steamboat Institute. It's a great place. I've been involved, 10 years or so now. It's a wonderful what has been accomplished here. So I thank you for all of that support. I'm also associated with 2 institutions that go right to the heart of the matter here. I'm at Hillsdale College, which of course is the best college in America. Witnessed a sense of a serious core built around the liberal arts to actually do what a college is supposed to do. I'm also, as you already brought up, I'm a trustee at New College, Florida, which is a different experiment, which is to see if we can reverse a state university and prevent it from, reverse its its takeover, right, and restore it as a liberal arts college, liberal arts honors college. So we came in and we dismissed the president and the provost. We got rid of their DEI programs, and this last week we abolished gender studies. But it strikes me that kind of, here's the range,
yeah, right,
of of institutions. And I guess I want to start with a general question, and a couple of people brought this up as well. How deep is the problem? Because that can help shape our thinking about what to do. My sense, and now I know what your sense, but we can talk about this for a minute. Wokeism is a term of art we use today that really is various manifestations coming out of postmodernism, which is alive and well in various places, in certain departments especially, which is why we abolished gender studies. But the question is, how many old liberals are still on most college campuses? Because in my case, several professors came up to us after meetings and said, I like what you're doing, but I will never say it in public.
Right.
But that would determine whether there's something there that we can work with. How deep do you think the problem is, and how extensive, or is this really a kind of a leading edge of postmodernism that needs to be controlled, cut back, abolished, such that you can actually have that old sense of liberalism in which you actually had the kind of liberal education that the university is to exist for?
Yeah, I mean, how deep is the problem? I think it's hard to say. Partly it's because there's this, as I said, a lot of the mischief is caused by the administrators that the faculty get blamed for, right? But there is a problem, which is no matter how much they are, if they're afraid to say it in public, what good is it, right? Yeah. Which is they're afraid, right? They're afraid of being thrown out of the club, right? And in that sense, I think it's a really deep problem. And the problem, as I see it, I think the woke attack on the universities is real, serious, and potentially existential. And you talk about sort of the goofiness of some of the humanities, but it's not just staying in the humanities, it never would just stay in the humanities. So, and this is what you have to understand about wokeism, is these woke ideas, I talked about how they don't believe in truth, but it's actually a deeper rot than that, which is when they talk about suppressing speech, they're not talking about suppressing error, right? Error can be taken care of by basically the traditional Enlightenment view of evidence, that sort of thing. What they care about is suppressing truth. They care about suppressing truths that are politically inconvenient, or in their view can be weaponized as political weapons. So I'll give you an example of that kind of illustrates the point. There was this professor at Brown who did this fascinating study, a psychology professor, this fascinating study of gender detransitioning during the COVID pandemic, right? And so what she was trying to test is kids who decide that they're going to gender transition. To what extent is that real, and to what extent is it a function of sort of social peer pressure? And so school closures and isolation of students was bad for a lot of things. It was great as a way of studying what happens if we remove the peer pressure, all right? What happened? A very large number of students detransitioned during that period. This went through peer review. It was published in a journal. And what ended up happening? The article ended up getting retracted. Members of the board resigned, right? And basically, why? They claimed there was problems with the methodology that nobody ever noticed before, but what was the problem? The real problem was they were afraid that could be weaponized, right? They were afraid of the political implications. Think about another example. Some of you may be familiar with Roland Fryer's famous work on race and police shootings, which was published in 2019 that found that unarmed black suspects are not more likely to be shot by police, and if anything, less likely to be shot by police. I would say that article could not be published today in the form that it was published in 2019, because everything has to go through a political litmus test. Nature magazine has said they are no longer going to publish articles that have troublesome political consequences. And so it's precisely because these things hit on these salient issues that the creep into the sciences was inevitable here. And so that's why I think that it's a freight train that keeps moving forward, and the lack of ability to push back, or lack of willingness of people to publicly push back. And so that's why, yeah, there could be a lot of quiet voices out there, but right. What good are they if they're going to be quiet?
No, I completely agree. Let's kind of parse it into some different categories here. DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. I mean, intellectually, it's just kind of systemic racism. It's the whole argument, but it's especially problematic in the sense that it's brought in through the administration of the college, and it's enforced as an administrative matter. So in that sense, I think you're absolutely right. I'm going to come back to later there are also some deep intellectual problems with modern liberalism that I think are being driven out of the faculty. But on something like DEI, what did you make of since you're a great law professor, what did you make of the free admissions versus Harvard? It strikes me that there's a huge opening there, having wiped out affirmative action. DEI strikes me as very open to being litigated as unconstitutional.
Absolutely, I think it is. And I'll say one thing that's striking about that, I think, is consistent with my theme of pessimism, which is, I listened to a lot of commentary on that. I read the case here, and I remember listening to one podcast that had a conservative, a moderate, and a liberal dissecting the case, and they all agreed on one thing, which is universities will do everything in their power to avoid and circumvent the Constitution, as the Supreme Court articulated it, right? Think about that, right? The primary institutions of higher education and society who influence our students, I don't think a single person in America believes that the universities are actually going to live up to what the Supreme Court told them they're supposed to, which is to stop discriminating in admissions, right? That's a pretty amazing statement. Is there anybody here who disagrees with that, right? And some people, the liberal thought it was bad that they would basically keep trying to do what they were doing in a slicker way. The conservative, they thought that was good. The conservatives thought it was bad. But nobody believed, but that's the kind of people who run universities today, right? That is sort of the morality of the people who run universities. Constitution, schmonstitution. What does the Supreme Court know about what I'm doing here?
I'll push back a little slightly. Just I think they're going to circumvent it as best as they possibly can.
Right.
Having said that, Supreme Court has established a moral high ground,
right,
which is very powerful. And
right,
the real argument there, and you should also read it, but the back and forth between Justice Thomas and Justice Jackson about systemic racism and autonomy.
Right.
And Justice Thomas was defending colorblind Constitution. Right. Brilliant. He just wiped the floor with her.
Right.
They'll try to get around that decision.
Right.
It'll come back up. Roberts is weak-kneed, but he's good on this question. He always has been.
Yep.
They'll try to, but it seems to me that the tectonic plates have changed in the debate over affirmative action. That strikes me as a very good thing.
And I agree with you on that. And I think you also made the point, which is it's going to require follow-up.
More
right?
follow-up.
It's going to require pushing. I just saw yesterday, the day before, great lawsuit filed by the people who are behind Students for Fair Admission, sued 2 law firms now for discrimination in employment and internship programs that they have. So hopefully this is going to spread to employment realm where I think it might really have teeth. So I think I don't want to belittle it, right? It's a very important ringing statement both on the morality and the constitutional value, and it just requires now tenacity and diligence to follow it up.
Okay, I'm putting together a couple other questions here, but now on the kind of the flip side, setting aside the administrators for a moment, I agree with you with that. But it strikes me that there is an argument coming out of the intellectual faculty that is destructive. I mean, thank you Woodrow Wilson for the progressivism. Thank you John Dewey for New Deal liberalism. Thank you Foucault for postmodernism.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a real problem.
Right.
And it strikes me that there's a real difference between, say, old liberals. And by old liberals, we mean, I had professors who were liberal, but they liked conservative students because we asked good questions, we argued, right? That's what we want to have. But the new liberals we have today is not only relativistic and historicist and nihilistic, it's because of all those things, it's about imposing a will.
Right.
It's completely closed-minded, and it's increasingly closed-minded to reality.
Right.
Well, that reality is the difference between male and female or whatever it might be. This reality makes no difference. It's all about the narrative. That strikes me that we should be driving a wedge between those. And
Right.
there's an aspect of postmodernism that does not belong at a liberal educational institution. What do we do about that?
Yeah, I mean it when I say that. I mean, what the woke worldview is an attack on the Enlightenment. It is an attack on democracy. right? Think about the logic. You talked about systemic racism, multiculturalism, and that sort of thing, right? In their worldview, there is no truth. There are just truths. There are narratives, right? And you're shaped fundamentally. We're not shaped as individual reasoning people, which is the premise of the Enlightenment, which is the premise of democracy, which is the premise of free speech. In their view, you're basically a prisoner of your multicultural aspects, right? Your different race and gender and sex and everything else. So why does that matter? Because that means that I can't fully speak to a woman or a minority or a gay, right? Because they're so much different, right? So in their view then, the whole premise that democracy is a world in which we talk about the public good makes no sense. The idea that we could reason and discover truth through conversation literally makes no sense.
Yeah,
and so this is the point where it becomes imposing your will. Either I win or you win, right?
I win or you lose.
Yeah.
When the 1619 Project first came out, I started bantering back and forth, doing interviews. I thought it was, we're going to have a discussion about the facts of history, and they were wrong on a lot of them. But they didn't care about the facts at all. It has nothing to do with it.
That's right.
Okay, but so what do we do with that? That's a real problem. I mean, if someone wanted to come into the university, let's say be considered for the one of the science departments, and they insisted that 2 + 2 must equal 5, or that the Earth was flat.
Right.
Why? We can't tolerate that nonsense. That's unrational.
Right.
What do we do?
I don't know, and so I'm kind of thinking this through, and I urge all of us, we all think through this as citizens, which is, I don't know what we do when you have such a large number of illiberal people and ideas who invade a liberal a liberal world that is designed according to certain rules. As I say, they're just not playing by the same rules that we play. We're playing by rules where we believe that everybody is.
We believe there are rules.
What?
We believe there are rules.
We believe there are rules, that they're neutral rules, right? So, for example, they don't believe in sort of neutral procedural rules like due process, equal treatment, right?
Free speech.
That sort of thing. Free speech, right? In their view, all of those rules just basically sustain the status quo in existing power relations, and so it all has to be subordinated to equity, right? And so we have to discriminate in favor of certain groups. We have to, as Marcuse famously said, we have to repress the speech of the powerful so that we elevate the speech of the less powerful, and so they see it as basically all those rules that hold. Constitutional democracy together and the liberal university together.
Okay, so a number of asked questions along these lines. What is their objective? It seems to me that their objective is to destroy the very idea of a university.
Yeah, this is another question I think about, which is, if you're interested, I did a podcast recently with Scott Atlas on his podcast about all this. And Scott kept pushing me, aren't these really just nihilists? Right? Isn't this really just nihilism? And I went back and read Leo Strauss's article on nihilism, and he may be right? As far as I can tell, they don't have a plan beyond just destruction. Beyond that, the powerful have to take their turn as the powerless and vice versa. They haven't thought beyond. But it's a constant revolution, right? You've got to constantly tweak the thing. And one of the things they've done that's different from Marxism is Marxism created testable hypotheses, right? Marxism said, if you embrace communism, you're going to be free and rich and, and the like. And instead we got gulags. And everybody said, okay, Marxism, we're done with that. They're not as clever. I hear they're much cleverer, right? The revolution never ends with these guys, other than that the people who have been in charge are going to have to take their bottom.
They're not nihilists, but they're Nietzschean, which is there's no meaning to anything, and the result of that is that I'm going to use my power and will to subject you to it.
It's
and
all
of course,
about
it becomes
power.
the French Revolution, which is at a certain point they start cutting off each other's heads, which you're seeing now. How many leftists have been canceled?
Right.
They can't stand anybody who's not on the
right.
reservation.
And so to your question, what do we do about it? All I'm doing now is sounding the alarm, right? In that same article, Strauss says that you have to be cleared out and you have to understand clearly what you're dealing with, right? And I think That's kind of where I'm at in my thinking about this, is we have to understand what exactly this is and how fundamental this is. And it's not just something we can just dismiss. It has economic implications, has implications for society, has implications for media, all these different sorts of things. And I think we need to wake up to the fact that, and among our kids, these are very powerful ideas, right? These are very influential ideas in the internet and, this sort of stuff. Right. And so that's what we need to be aware of.
I mean, there's a bunch of different practical ideas. I mean, you didn't, accreditation, there's all sorts of different things that can be done here. I think that's, in a certain sense, not the point and not the essence of your warning. But I mean, and I think would you agree? I mean, the postmodern problem, the intellectual problem, and I use that in air quotes because it's an irrational argument that's dominating vast areas of the modern academy. You must understand that is not liberalism.
Right.
And you're sending your kids into that, or you're supporting that. You are completely supporting utter emptiness. And this is I don't know what analogy we want to use, but I mean, this is what's feeding the modern, all the problems we face today. Think of the administrative state, all the things we don't like going on. What do you think gave rise to that? The arguments in the universities.
Right.
Because if there's nothing, then it's about bringing it about through will. And what's the best way to do that? But through government. And that's, that's...
Yeah, and I
that's
think
got to be destroyed.
Right. No, that's right. And we need to and that's why I keep saying we need to understand they're playing a power game, right? So we can write these books about free speech, right? If you believe that the purpose of university is to pursue truth, then free speech is a trivial deduction, right? That's a 2-paragraph argument. You don't need 300 pages for that.
But if you don't believe in truth.
But if you don't believe in the truth, you just take that book and you drop it in the trash, right? And so when we're not addressing these arguments because we're not understanding the structure of their arguments. To fight them starts with understanding them. And this is where they're appealing to younger people in particular, to students, to our kids, to our grandkids, right? And we're not joining the fight because we're not understanding what it is, right? And we're also kind of playing this sucker game where they're using power, right? Where they just keep punching and we keep trying to explain to them why they should stop punching us, right? That's basically how this rolls. And so, unfortunately, that leaves us in a difficult place, right? Which is, and that's sort of the structure of my remarks is sometimes, tit for tat. Sometimes just playing the sucker card over and over again is not the winning strategy in a situation like this. Trying to appeal to their better angels of their nature isn't always the case if basically, in their view, they're like, why? Why would we stop punching you when you're not punching back, right? That makes me queasy to think about that. But I think that's the world we're in.
At New College in our trustee meetings, which are all public, by the way, we have to sit there for an hour and a half to hear all of their comments, and they hate us, it turns out. But then we do something, and they've never had somebody actually do something.
Right.
And they just don't know. They have no idea how to react to that.
Right.
So anyway, as we're kind of coming towards the end here, I want to come back to higher education more broadly. Several people asked this, including one very good question. Is there still something worth preserving in higher education? So on the one hand, I'm torn. On the one hand, I'd like to blow up a lot of these institutions, right? I mean, Harvard strikes me as a hedge fund with a little college teaching nihilism connected to it. Having said that, the human mind is constructed in a way that what we understand as higher education in its true form, liberal education, is a human. I mean, can we still save it? Is it recoverable? Is there?
Yeah, that's why I get so passionate about this. Right? You can see I get wound up. I'm the first in my family to graduate from college. Right. Going to college and being exposing ideas transformed my life. Right. I mean, I've dedicated my career to teaching, to research, to teaching students, mentoring students, sort of, pursuing these ideas, and I think it's really important. And if there's anything worth fighting for, this is it, because you alluded to it earlier, Matt, which is that the problem that we have today that I see with students is not, I mean, to some extent, they're kind of being, influenced by bad ideas, but I think even worse is they just develop a cynicism towards ideas, right? Which is they know when they're hearing stuff that doesn't make any sense, but nobody's giving them the tools to grapple with it.
Right.
Yeah, they're getting no alternatives. And so they just become cynics about ideas. And so it ends up reinforcing this sort of nihilism, this sort of kind of this power dynamic where basically saying, that's wrong, I don't know what's right, I just know I don't like that, right? And so the essence, we can't have a free constitutional democracy without good universities, right? One of the things I've become very aware of over the last few years that I never really appreciated is the importance of having a responsible elite in this society, right? The elites of the government, universities, churches, communities, right? This is what holds the institutional structure together. The framers understood that there was a lot of different power check power within the government. But one of the things I never really focused on is the way in which elites need to check the populist passions. And what we've seen in recent years, unfortunately, is the elites have been accelerating us down the hill, right? The elites are ahead of sort of the public in terms of cashing in these institutions. And so I think trying to recognize the importance of those universities and the like is really important.
A lot of these liberal professors who are kind of like, I kind of like getting rid of gender studies, but the problem is they have forgotten, as many of us have, we've forgotten how to defend liberty in its truest sense.
Right.
I mean, this is you're absolutely right. You can't have a free country without a constitution, but you can't have a constitution without it being grounded in principles of human equality.
Right.
And you can't have a sense of human equality unless it's grounded in a sense that we are metaphysically free as human persons.
Right.
And that's exactly what the universities have denied. So everything, all this work really goes back to that. So
and so to understand why we need to have free speech, why we have democracy, right? That democracy isn't just power imposing itself on power. Democracy is a way for us to reason toward a sense of the common good, right? To create a better society, to preserve a free enterprise system that creates unprecedented amount of wealth, to understand where wealth comes from, all these different sorts of things. Those are all complex ideas, right? We need universities to do that. And if universities are failing at their mission, eventually all those other institutions are going to collapse.
We need these, whatever these institutions are, we need these institutions to teach the mind,
yeah,
to liberate it. Thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Good luck in Boulder, Colorado. Keep it up. Thank
Thanks.
you all.
Thank you.